poetry. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about what we know about structure so far. And we have studied structure in short stories when we talked about plot structure. And that's the order in which events are told. That's how the story is kind of built. We talked about these different forms of plot structure. We talked about there being a framed narrative, that story within a story, or the linear method when the story is told in order from event to event. Hi, Jared. We talked about nonlinear when the story is just kind of told all over the place, or epistolary when the story is told through diary entries or letters. The flashback when we so that's how we talked about short stories. For poetry, we're going to look at structure, but we're going to look at it a little differently. We're looking at how the poem is built and how it looks on the page. So called paragraphs, right? And those paragraphs are a complete thought. In poetry, we have stanzas. And so I want you to think of poems as stanzas as little poetry paragraphs. We also want to look at how the poem is laid out on the page. I know you guys have seen poems where there's like one skinny line and there's all this white space, or the words maybe make a shape, right? Like stairs or something. It's okay, Singal. And we also want to think about punctuation, about commas and periods and dashes. And when we see commas and dashes, that long straight line, we pause. And when we see periods, we actually take a full stop before we start going on. So just keep those things in mind as we look at structure and poetry. We're going to look at a poem called Solitude by Lord Byron. And we're going to do it through one of the AP Daily videos. So I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to play this video. We'll stop and talk about halfway through and then we'll go on.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Stabnick from Miller Place High School, where I teach AP English Literature and Composition. And in today's video on poetry, I'm going to explain to you the function of structure in a text. This may be something that you've taken for granted all along, that poems have stanzas and they break, and you've never really thought much about why they break. Well, in today's lesson, I'm going to give you some things to chew on, some things to think about that may help you understand, just like in architecture, just like in any type of design, the form of something should suit its function. And that means simply the way it's designed should have a purpose. And I think so often in poems, stanza breaks have purposes. I learned about this through Mary Oliver. She is a fantastic poet. You should check out some of her poems. But I read this book a few years ago, Poetry Handbook, and she gave me two ideas that have stayed with me. And the first is captured here in this quote, that when we think of stanzas, we should often think about paragraphs. And I like that idea because it forces me, as I'm reading the poem, to think about how a stanza is unified, how it's organized by a controlling idea. So it's something that I always keep in the back of my mind. What is the dominant idea of this stanza? The second thing, and I think this is really insightful, and this is probably coming from a poet, so she knows what she's talking about, that stanza breaks will do one of two things. The first thing is that it may create a hesitation, almost like a pause. And the second thing is that it may accelerate the pacing of the poem. And how does that happen? How does that pause result? Usually it's the result of a complete thought. So it's ending with a sentence and a period. But sometimes poets take those thoughts and they're not complete at the end of a stanza. And they're doing that to get you to that next idea, and they're hastening the tempo. They're moving it faster and faster and faster for a deliberate purpose. And you're going to see how that works in just a second. So here's my example. It's the poem Solitude by Lord Byron. It's a great poem about the natural world. And it's not just one stanza long, it's 2 stanzas long, so it's going to serve our purpose here. We're going to try to figure out why there is that break. But first, I'm going to pause for a second. I just want you to read the poem over, and I want you to think about this poem in terms of dominant ideas. If stanzas are like paragraphs, think about what's the dominant idea of stanza 1 as well as the dominant idea of stanza 2. I'll pause.
Okay, let's go ahead and read this together, and then I'll give you a few minutes to think about what's going on in each stanza, okay? Called Solitude by Lord Byron. To sit on rocks, to muse or flood and fell, to slowly trace the forest's shady scene, where things that own not man's dominion dwell, and mortal foot hath ne'er on or rarely been. To climb the trackless mountain all unseen, with the wild flock that never needs a fold, alone o'er steeps and foaming falls to lean. This is not solitude, 'tis but to hold converse with nature's charms, and view her stones unrolled. But midst the crowd, the hurry, the shock of man, to hear, to see, to feel, and to possess, and roam alone, the world's tired denizen, with none who bless us, none whom we can bless, minions of splendor shrinking from distress. None that, with kindred consciousness eluded, if we were not, would seem to smile the less of all the flattered, followed, sought, and sued. This is to be alone. This is solitude. All right, I am going to walk around the classroom and talk with some of the students here. I want you to think about what's happening in each of those stanzas. Something different. All right, we'll talk in a minute. Oh, okay, good. All right, guys, I hope you were able to see those 2 different stanzas. The first one's talking about nature, and the next one's talking about a crowd, a city, a place with a lot of people. Miss Simmons is here, and she's going to talk to us a little bit today about something that's really important. And when she's done, we're going to get back to poetry. All right? So please give Miss Simmons your attention.
Hello, everyone. Yay. Yeah. Hey, who is it?
It's Daniel.
Hello, Daniel. All right, I'm going to present some information today on how to stay connected with me, Also, suicide prevention, and then progression plans if you have not done that already, which I just know y'all have because my seniors are always on top of things. All right. How to stay connected to me. You guys need to join my Remind and my Google Classroom. So join both because I disseminate information on both platforms. So you may want to take a little picture of that and go back to it and go ahead and sign in. Everyone should have already been on my Remind at the very least. Okay, here's some information.
If your friend mentions suicide or self-harm, take them seriously. If you believe that they're in danger, call 911 or the Poison Control Center immediately. Your friend's life is more important than their privacy. Wellcasters. Have you ever had someone just want to end it all? Permanently? It's never easy to think about or hear. Yes, life can get so complicated and overwhelming, it's hard to even imagine that things would ever get better again. But most people bounce back. Unfortunately, some don't. Suicide is a tragedy that affects everyone, and it's one of the leading causes of death for people 24 and younger. Here's what to do if you suspect a friend might be having thoughts of suicide. Tip 1. Learn to recognize dangerous signs. Has your friend talked about feeling hopeless or anxious? Have you noticed a change in your friend's behavior, acting withdrawn, sleeping less, sleeping a lot more? Maybe they're abusing alcohol or drugs, giving away their belongings. Maybe your friend has even talked about hurting themselves, or worse, wanting to die. For a complete checklist of suspect behaviors, pause and print out our worksheet. Tip 2. Initiate dialogue in a non-judgmental way. Sit your friend down in a comfortable or familiar environment where the two of you can talk privately and freely. Start by telling your friend how much you care about them, but some of their behaviors have concerned you. Refer to our worksheet for ideas on how this conversation might flow. If you determine that your friend is in danger and that they need help immediately, please call 911. Household items like pills or razor blades, they quickly become lethal weapons in the hands of a suicidal person. Tip 3. React with feeling. If your friend does confide in you thoughts of suicide, be compassionate and make it known that you're there to listen. Don't aim to change their mind, start an argument, or give advice. Many people who attempt suicide don't actually want to die. They just want their suffering to end, and suicide seems like the only avenue. Engage in conversation with your friend and find out what's hurting them. Tip 4. Shift the focus from sources of pain to resources for treatment. In addition to external challenges, your friend might also be fighting internal demons that require professional care. Depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders are often present in the suicidal. Many of these illnesses can be diagnosed and treated. Encourage your friend to seek help and offer to work with them to locate a mental health professional or clinic. We strongly recommend looping their family members into this process. Tip 5. Lastly, stay connected. Even after your friend has sought help, seems to be on the path to healing. Encourage other friends, roommates, and family members to check in on your friend during this vulnerable time. This is an especially important step, since many suicides occur in a period of apparent improvement. Listen, this video is a starting point. Please do your own independent research to identify more resources. But here are a few we recommend.
All right, here are some community resources if you have a friend who is thinking about suicide. And just a couple of notes. If you do have a friend that is, you see those symptoms, please ask them straight out, are you thinking about suicide? And please be non-judgmental when talking to them. Be sure to let a trusted adult know what is going on, whether it's their parents, a teacher, counselor, administrator, other faculty members, just let someone know. Here's another number. This number is easy to remember. It's 1-800-273-TALK. You can talk to a live person, or if you don't want to talk to a live person, you can text as well. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? Everyone just real quiet. All right, progression plans. If you have not signed your progression plan, you need to go into focus, press progression plan, scroll to the bottom of the page and sign it, scroll back up to the top and click submit. This is one step towards your graduation, guys. Everyone needs to sign their progression plan. All right, any questions? And also, if you look in the chat area, I am going to put a link there to a survey for you to fill out, and this will be part of your attendance. So go ahead and fill that out. It's real short. Everyone see the link?
Yes.
All right. So, thank you, Daniel. I can't believe Dirk is not talking. Really?
I was gonna say something to you earlier, but I knew you would say something back.
She for real just called you out right there.
I'm just like, my Durga is not talking? That's odd. Wake up, Grandpa.
I am up.
Miss Simmons, it's so early in the morning.
What? It's 2:25.
That's still morning for teenagers.
Girl, bye. No. All right, thank you, Miss Ritchie. Grandpa, you up? You in class? You awake? Grandpa.
Yes, ma'am, I'm up.
All right, Grandpa. All right, see you guys. Bye-bye.
Okay, darlings, we're going to go back to poetry. Here we are. Okay. Now we're going to go back to the poem. Okay, so I hope you guys were able to see those two separate paragraphs. The first one really looking at nature, and the second one looking at a city or people. And so we're going to listen to the rest of what, I forgot his name, has to say about this. Hi, Alyssa. And then we're going to go and we're going to look at another poem. Okay, so I'm going to mute myself and we're going back to poetry. Don't quit on me, guys. I'm gonna be done with you soon.
All right, here's what I came up with. So if I look at stanza 1, I look at stanza 2, I see that they are different, and I see differences in how they're addressing things. The first stanza talks about nature, and it's reinforcing the idea that when we're in nature, we're not really alone, that we have company when we're in the natural world. Stanza 2 does something a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily talk about the natural world that we normally think of, like with mountains and forests, but it's being amongst people, maybe even a city. And as someone that's from New York, who lived in New York City for a bunch of years, I can totally relate to stanza 2. That sometimes when I walk down the streets of New York City, even though I'm surrounded by people, it feels like you're alone. So I see how this is organized by dominant ideas. Now I want to talk a little bit about pacing. So if we look at these 4 lines right here, the first 2 are how stanza 1 ends. This is not solitude, 'tis but to hold converse with nature's charms and view her stores unrolled. And I feel like that is that complete thought that leaves me relaxed, almost at but amidst the crowd, the hurry, the shock of men, to hear, to see, to feel, and to possess. That is completely different from what I felt at the end of stanza 1. So as that thought was concluded that nature gives us company, and I'm at peace with it, it quickly transitions after that pause. The break didn't cause me to hesitate so much. As I start stanza 2, I immediately accelerate. And I think it's all those commas in a row and the short, choppy phrases, the hurry, the shock of men, to hear, to see, to feel, and to possess. It almost creates this like tension or anxiety. So what should we take away in today's video? Well, I want you to think about structure. I want you actually to examine why that break is there, if there is a break in a stanza, if there is a break in a poem. And I want you to think about that in terms of what is it doing to myself as a reader? What's it doing to the speed of the poem? Does the stanza break close a thought, or is it connecting it to another one that's going to start a new stanza? And as far as speed, does it slow you down or speed it up? And what I thought was cool about today's poem is we kind of had both. We had stanza 1 end slowing us down, almost like if you were doing a meditation. But then stanza 2 just starts picking up the pace right away from the beginning, and it accelerates me. So as you move forward in your reading, if you come across a break, examine it, question it, think about why it's there and how the form of that poem is suiting its function. Thank you for joining me, and be well.
Okay, so I hope you guys got to see the importance of the 2 stanzas and breaking that poem apart. That poet, Lord Byron, is talking about 2 different aspects of solitude. One is being alone in nature. She doesn't really count as solitude. And the other is being alone among people, which he does count as solitude. And he's using the structure of the poem to separate those 2 things. You're giving up. I don't blame you, Jared. Then what we're going to do now is we're going to look at one more poem. Okay, well, we're actually going to look at 2. But we're going to look at another poem by Walt Whitman. This one's about a spider. And I want you to keep those ideas about structure and stanzas in mind as we watch this next poem. Okay? So I'm going to mute myself.
Miller Place High School, back with another poetry video. We're going to talk about structure again. This time we're going to apply it to a Walt Whitman poem. So enough with the talking, let's get to the teaching. In today's lesson, I want you to learn something that we're going to review and also something that we're going to introduce. So we're reviewing structure, and specifically we're going to review what we learned about stanza breaks. The new thing is we're going to look at line breaks as well. And in a way, they have similar concepts. So often we see transferability across subjects and across disciplines. This is no different here. Now, in my previous video, we talked about stanzas being like paragraphs, and that's because they are often self-contained units of thought. They signify the beginning of an idea and also the end of an idea. Many times, when a stanza ends with a period, it'll cause the reader to pause, to gather themselves, and to see that idea come to a completion. But sometimes poets won't end stanzas with periods. They'll have that thought continue on to the next stanza. And in some ways that can hasten the pace of a poem. Also, I'm going to talk about line breaks. Some lines are short, some lines are long, and often that's a deliberate point by the poet to draw emphasis. For centuries, poets were defined by meter and rhythm, where lines had to have a certain number of beats. Well, the poem I'm going to share with you today is from Walt Whitman. And he was one of the first poets to break from those conventions. He experimented with length and with form, and it's one of the reasons why I find him so endearing as a poet. He was a rebel. All right, so let's look at our poem. A noiseless patient spider, I am marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated, marked how to explore the vacant vast surrounding. It launched forth filament, filament, filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached, in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling catch somewhere, O my soul. All right, the two things I want you to do with this poem, we have two stanzas. See if you could figure out why Whitman decided to break up this poem into two stanzas. And the second thing is just look at the lines themselves. What do you notice about them? And not necessarily the words, but the form of them. So hit pause, jot down some ideas, and I'll see you on the other end.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to read over this and look at those stanzas. Why are they separate? And then look at the punctuation and the layout of the lines. I'm going to talk with the students who are here in class, and I'll see you in a minute. Okay, my friends who are in class, what is the first stanza about? Don't make it harder than it is. What does it say on the very first line? So what is it about? The fire, right? And what is it doing in that first stanza? It's on the edge of a precipice, is what it says. You guys know what that is? That's like a ledge, right? So it's like right here on this ledge. And what is it trying to do? It's trying to explore. But how is it going to get off this ledge to explore? It's throwing something. What is it throwing? What is it throwing? What does the text say? Filament. Okay, so a filament is a thin thread. What does a spider have that it could throw that would be like a filament, a thin, a web, right? So here's the spider. It's trying to go exploring, but it can't. So it's throwing its webs out, hoping that it'll catch on something, right? So that the spider can go. So far, so good? Mm-hmm. All right, what's the next stanza about? Because it's not about a spider anymore. About a soul. Oh, my soul. And what is that soul trying to do? That inner part of you.
Thinking, like explore.
It's trying to explore and connect. So it's also throwing things out, trying to get to something, to some sort of connection. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So you have this spider in one case physically trying to move, and this soul in the next stanza. They're similar, but they're separate, right? That's why they're in separate stanzas, and that structure helps us to see that. Yes? All right, see, look at your literary analysis. Okay, guys, I hope that you were able to see the separate structure in this poem. The spider in the first stanza trying to get off its precipice or its ledge by throwing its webs or its filaments out to connect to the world so it can go explore. And in the second stanza, you see the soul also trying to connect, throwing itself out to try and make a connection with other people, ideas, all right? So this idea of connecting the spider and the man's soul, the speaker's soul. Same idea, but also different. That's why they're separate in structure. Let's go back and listen to the rest of what our teacher has to say, and then I'll walk you through your assignment.
All right, if I take those two questions that I threw out at you and I apply them to myself, stanzas, I identify that there are two, and I'm going the literal route first because I think that's our baseline, that's our foundation. I know the first stanza is about a spider. It says it right from the beginning. And I know the second stanza is about the speaker's soul. So we have a separation here, and there may be a difference. And as I look at the lines, I did some math, basic math, but I counted and there were 8 commas. That's what stood out to me. Almost every single line ended in a comma, except for the last line of each stanza. Those ended with periods. So now I need to connect these things and draw some conclusions, make some inferences. Well, one of the things I know about commas is they connect thoughts, that showing thoughts run on, that there's more to add to them. And in a way, if I look at the spider and I look at the speaker, I think that form suits that function. Both the spider and the speaker are seeking to connect. And I see words like vacant, measureless, detached. I see 2 things that are isolated that are looking to connect to something, the soul and the spider. So even though they are separated, this spider and the speaker, I think in a way they're connected. And even though the stanzas divide them, I think in a way the commas unite them. That these are 2 people just trying to find something to latch onto. And I love that line. It launched forth filament, filament, filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. That spider is not giving up. It's going to persevere. So the other thought that I had about the lines, since this is a poem attempting to connect, we see 2 subjects wanting to find their place. To you catch and fling somewhere, oh my soul. So what should we take away from today's lesson? Well, it's a phrase that I repeated earlier. The form of something should suit its function. We see this in architecture. The design of something should suit its purpose. And we see that as well in poetry. I love the fact that Whitman included all those commas instead of periods to show that effort, that tireless effort to connect. As always, I thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this Whitman poem. Check out Oh Me, Oh Life, Oh Captain, My Captain, if you want to read more. And as always, be well, my friends. Hey everyone, I'm Brian Stabnick from Miller.
Hey guys. Okay, let's go back to, okay, so we've done both poems. And now what you're going to do is you're going to read Oh Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. It's important for you guys to understand a little bit about this poem before we start. Amarian, wake up. Okay, before we start, so you'll get the purpose. I swear I'm almost done. Okay. First off, it's an elegy. That's a poem of serious reflection. It's mourning the loss of someone who's died. So we're going to read this poem. I'm going to let you guys annotate for structure. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this poem, and then I'm going to turn you guys loose on your assignment. So where do you find this poem? Well, you go into our Google Classroom, go into classwork, and under Unit 2, you'll see 2 things: structure and poetry assignment and structure and poetry question. We want to go into the assignment. Somebody has already done it. You want to pull up the PDF and open it with Cami. And I'm going to read it to you. Unless there's somebody who wants to read it. Any volunteers? Anybody want to read it? Okay. Then I shall read it. But I want you guys to look at the stanzas. You already read it? Last year? Okay. So then you know what this poem's about, okay? All right. So if we look at the stanzas, you can see some are all the way over to the side and some are not. Some are in the middle. Here we go. Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, 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 oh, the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold and dead. Oh, Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a crowding, for you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Your captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exalt, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I, with mournful tread, walk the deck, my captain lies fallen cold and dead. So I think in there you guys see a couple of different things, right? You definitely get the idea of death and the captain being dead. But there's also bells, celebration, exalt, right? What's going on here? Well, Walt Whitman wrote this poem in 1865 to celebrate the end of the Civil War and the death of Abraham Lincoln. So I think in the stanzas, you see both of those things. You see the celebration and the elegy, which is that sad remembrance, the honor for the person who has passed away. You're going to annotate this poem. For each stanza, I want you to use a comment box and tell me what's happening in that stanza. I want you to think about why some of the stanzas are all the way to the margin and why some are not. I want you to look at the punctuation, at the tone, at what's happening in the poem. And after you are done annotating, you're going to answer the question in Google Classroom. And the question is, how does the structure of the poem, O Captain, My Captain, help Walt Whitman to achieve his purpose? Well, for purpose, think about a couple of things. It's an elegy. It's a remembrance for someone who's died. What does Whitman want you and the people of 1865 to think or do or feel after reading the poem? That's his purpose. And how does separating it into stanzas help him achieve that? All right. You know your assignment. If you feel like you can do it, go do it. If you need help or have questions, stick around.
Bye, Mr. Chi.